Hi, welcome to another Google Hangout on Living Income Guaranteed. Today we have Gabriel from Belgium, and we will be discussing the preamble to take on the law system. How are we directed by laws that we mostly, the majority of the people do not even understand, and how we in our education system are certainly not educated to get to know the ins and outs of how we are subject to these laws and how everything in our lives is essentially founded upon legal systems, words, meanings, and essentially also looking at how our basic human rights are also laws that are currently not being enforced by our entire system. So, Gabriel, welcome.
Hi.
So let's begin with the problem that we have at hand. What goes on with, the title of our Google Hangout is Law is a Riddle. What would you say about this? Let's begin with that.
Well, it's very interesting. If when I listen to you, the word laws almost sounds like loss, So there you already have it. It's like a loss. So. Okay, so the point we were looking at with law being a riddle and in relation to social change and taking responsibility and stuff like that, is the simple point that in the current stage, the system is communicating with the people through laws, and the fact that they are quite incomprehensible from a perspective that for an average person to effectively deal with the law, understand the law, work with the law, they basically should have a law education. And that obviously causes a big problem, which on the one hand is 100% recognized by every person that is close to any law field. They know that. On the other hand, it is completely accepted as that's just how it is, So it's a very strange situation, and shows the level of acceptance that we have towards, I would say, the lack of education, and also the accepted levels of abuse, basically. It's not a way to
it's a form of ignorance, right?
Yes,
and as we know, when we remain ignorant to the powers that are guiding our lives through this language of the system, as you were saying, we are subject to terms that we don't even understand, that we don't get to be informed about or educated in school. So what would you say is another problem, with regards to education, vocabulary, with regards to laws?
Okay, so this is the point I already referred to, is that as I study law, because I'm in the process of studying law, is that I see that as I familiarize myself with certain texts, and these texts are supposed to be kind of support or part of procedures that are actually for citizens, that is part of what they need to go and consult if they want to start this or that procedure, for instance, against a government body and so on, is that for a normal person, those things are quite inaccessible, is that it is quite hermetic, it's like you can't really grasp it effectively without you having a education in law, basically, is how I see it. So the rule of equality before the law can only ever be realized if everyone basically gets a law education to be able to work with and deal with the law and get kind of comfortable in the system and understand what it is they're actually involved with, So that in itself would already create kind of a sense of responsibility, whereas now you're kind of walking into this magic forest of laws, What is it?
Exactly. If we look at how the system is constructed, we have the saying, might makes right. Mm-hmm. So it's the entire power structure that we are subject to, and that creates our rights, which is the writing, the laws. And within this, we are completely devoid of any understanding, but also in terms of how our basic human rights, for example, are supposed to be laws, and they aren't being applied. So what is the problem here in relation to the law system and the economic system? Because it is also another form of law, a language that is completely alien to us, or the majority of the people. And what is causing this in relation to our ignorance or illiteracy in relation to the legal systems and the vocabulary?
Well, it's actually very interesting that if you look at the laws that are there to protect your rights, there are few in number, right? And they are not what they seem, okay? For instance, if you look at the right to life, that is apparently a very evident, straightforward right. However, if you go look at what that practically implies, the actual meaning that is given to it in law, it is close to meaningless, the right to life, because under the right to life, you can actually starve. It is all meaningless. You can not be granted life, basically. And the reason why I say, for instance, that there are few laws or that the number of text or encryption around living rights and life rights is meager is that if you compare it now to property rights and property laws, now that is extensive, you know. So that is like a whole field that is carefully crafted and protected and developed, whereas the basic stuff, you know, the right to life is not sufficiently effectively developed, is not effectively worded, defined, and made concrete, you know. They have no problems going all the way to making property laws and everything that is related to accumulating wealth as concrete as fucking possible, you know, no problems with that. But to make the right to life concrete, whoa, that's really too much asked. You really need to start asking different questions, you know.
Yeah, that's a very important point. We have all of these specialized systems that protect essentially private property and everything that goes along with the current capitalist system, which obviously it would be very beneficial for every one of us if we, to that capitalist system, essentially integrate that living right to life, which is essentially integrating the capitalist system along with the foundation of human rights. So that's how we can move on to the solution, in essence, which is if we see that the problem is we're not understanding the law system, what would be...
I just lost you there.
To create a to the next of the system. Let's go by step. Education.
Okay, so there was just a bug in the connection, so you have to kind of repeat your question.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we will begin explaining first the. Sorry. We will go through the solutions. I mean, we have seen that there is a lack of education for people to understand the language that we are subject to as a legal system. So how could we go walking it in relation to understanding our living rights from birth, you know, as part of our education, the legal words that are used to essentially define the laws that we are subject to, and then how it could be implemented as part of the entire economic structure, in essence, to go into the living income guaranteed solution.
Okay, so in
a way...
let's
begin with the first part, education.
Okay, so in a way what the system has done is quite clever, you know, because on the one hand it is demanding of everyone to be like an expert in the law, to be able to read and understand the law, which would actually require all of humanity to waste all their time in studying law, okay? So now that is not practical, you know, because other more important things need to be done. So what this will in practicality require is that a group of people walk that point and go familiarize themselves with the law and study it, to then get themselves into positions where influence is possible, where difference can be made, and once that position is stable, to start, you know, articulating those rights we discussed, you know, living rights, life rights, basic income rights, to that then to make that then part of the system, basically, to further differentiate those rights.
So, in essence, yes, we first have to be educated within the current legal system, how it operates, to then get into that position, be able to establish essentially a new legal system. And from there, because it is the language with which the system communicates with the population, how can we then translate that to the people's language, or make it part, or integrate it as part of the people's understanding of the legal system?
Yeah. So the only solution is like a total simplification of the legal system, which in itself already points to another interesting dichotomy in the current system, is that on the one hand, because we're talking now about how the system communicates with the people, okay? On the one hand, yes, there is the law, which is like extremely hermetic and incomprehensible. It's like a secret. And on the other hand, you have the media, which is like the oversimplification. It's like the Dumbo style.
Yeah.
So it's like there's no balance in that also, you know. So the system is really, really quite polarized from that perspective, in that there is no actual communication. There's only diversion, if you look at it.
So the solution would have to be integrating these basic understanding. I mean, in school you get all of these subjects that are related to matters that are not really relevant to what actually directs our lives. So, I mean, you only get law education if you are in some kind of specialized area of knowledge, such as humanitarian sciences and so forth. So would you say and agree that it would have to be integrated as part of...
Yes, absolutely, education? Absolutely, because it is so fundamental, you know, that it's like if you're going to play the Monopoly game, you know, let's make like a simple comparison. If you play the Monopoly game, what happens first? You know, the rules of the game are explained. What happens in society, the rules are not explained. So how does that work, you know?
Yet we are all subject to it.
Yes, yes.
And also in terms of, let's talk about and discuss the solution to, I mean, human rights. We have them placed there very nicely in this paper, and everyone is apparently aware of them. You learn them as a child, even the rights to children and so forth. But wait a minute, as you were saying off air, they're not enforced, and still a person can go hungry because their basic human rights are not guaranteed.
Yes, and interestingly, when I was studying, for instance, international law, there was like a case mentioned in India where there was basically a food crisis, a crisis of food availability, and the people were starving, to put it simple. Now, at that point, there was a legal action taken from the perspective that some were stating that the government was infringing the people's right to life, based on what? On the fact that the government actually had supplies available, you know, of food, and was not distributing them to the people. So in that context, they were able to connect, you know, supporting someone in a physical, practical manner to the right to life. So what this indicates is that if you really push the point far enough, there is actually an awareness that the right to life should be something practical, concrete, you know. However, if you then look at what consequence there is in terms of the right to life, as it is still understood, is very little. It's still something abstract, it's still something meaningless, and also, I mean, this is now a bit out of the context of this discussion, but how can you talk about the right to life when there is still a right to war, you know? How do you combine all these things?
Exactly. Or even the meaning of life, the meaning of equality. We have proven throughout all of these years of our investigation that even the meaning of equality, for example, is currently being turned into some kind of propaganda system to only refer to the right to have a gay marriage, for example, in America. So you have people equating equality to that right. And what about the equality of life, of us being one and equal, which is essentially what is backed up apparently by the human rights?
Yes, and that also shows how children, as they grow up, are actually trained to accept absurdity, you know, because, and to, as it's like you are trained to accept cognitive dissonance, you know, because on the one hand the system proclaims dignity, human rights, respect, and so on the other hand there is a right to war where the basic rights are all suspended. So this is not properly explained, and so a child integrates all this information. Now, how is that going to form a basis for common sense?
Beginning also with the money system, let's not go that far. I mean, you learn that this is the value for 5 euros or $5, and that is how things are. I mean, that's another form of law, of course, that we are all abiding to, and there's no common sense in it. And I know that if I don't have this paper money, I have no right to life. So then you as a child are like, well, I'm reading this child rights, my human rights are supposed to be guaranteed, but wait a minute, if I don't have that little paper, my human right is not guaranteed. You know? And yes, it's perfectly cognitive dissonance and the perfect way to just keep people in belief systems. So we've defined law as a belief system that is not guaranteeing life. Big problem.
Yeah, and also to come back to the point of education is that, I mean, the money system is also a system basically comprising laws, and there's also a massive lack of education around the economic system and the money system, you know, which that problem as such causes also apathy and inability to use common sense in relation to what would a right to life even mean, you know.
So that would have then to be part of our basic education, again, not only the legal system as our rights, but the understanding of how the money system operates. And how, you know, within that understanding of, yes, if I want my human rights to be guaranteed, then the human rights have to be integrated as part of an economic model, which is then living income guaranteed. Okay, we have a question for you. Would you suggest that governments create an accessible version of the law, or at least the fundamental laws that affect the citizens directly, in a very basic vocabulary so that everyone could be aware of the existing laws, rights, and obligations? Do you know if any country has this initiative already?
I'm not aware of the initiative per se. I wouldn't be surprised if there is, but what is there is the awareness of the problem in every country. You know, it's almost like in every textbook that you look at, they'll state, yeah, and the law is incomprehensible, we know, and you're supposed to know it, you know, it makes no sense, we know, but, you know, that's how it is.
So that would be also part of our political reform required at an educational level, and also political and legal to make it comprehensible.
Yeah, and then in terms of the question, yeah, of course, the solution is clearly that laws must be made comprehensible. Looking at, should the government do that? Maybe, or maybe it needs to be a people's movement. I'm actually quite doubtful as to the capacity of current governments to produce anything of that sort.
Of course.
So,
because it's not in their best interest either at the moment. No. So we have to be very careful on how, yes, this initiative, for example, of living income guaranteed is a political foundation that must be for the people, by the people, within taking all of these problems and loopholes that we have in legal systems as well, to be able to fill in the gaps along with the economic system so that a solution is proposed politically, in essence. There's no other way, definitely.
Yeah.
So in relation to, we're about to give the conclusion, which is what would be then the ideal way to create a sustainable, sound legal system in relation to the economic system that we're proposing?
Well, the interesting part or the considerations now that have become clear within this discussion is that there are three things that you cannot actually separate. One is law, two is education, and three is economy. So whatever you do has to include these 3 points all together. You know, you cannot change one and leave the others untouched. So the solution to a better legal system is a better economy and a better education. The solution to a better education is a better legal system and a better economy. The solution to a better economy is a better legal system and a better education. So it all works together, you know.
Exactly, and kind of change the equation from might makes right to the right makes the power of the people, gives power to the people. So the laws actually empowering people instead of subjugating all of us to these loopholes and missing understandings that just lead us to the current abuse that we're all accepting and allowing. So self-responsibility first as well.
Yes, and also off air we mentioned this point that this is precisely the point that gives government power, is this point of inaccessibility of the law as such, and it is becoming so vast and extensive that a person not understanding the law, what will they do? They will obviously feel inferior to the law and not not realize their power, so to speak, within it all, and how they can empower themselves and have a say in anything.
Exactly, very important, and we will conclude with this point. Education is the key, and we will be focusing on that here in this Hangouts, because in order to support the proposal of the living income guaranteed, we have to be aware of all the lacks, all the loopholes, all of the entire flaw within the system that has not enabled us to, for example, have basic human rights guaranteed, and how that links to the entire system. As Gabriel said very clearly, education, the law system, and the economic system all together, and this is the foundation of what living income guaranteed is all about. So thanks a lot, Gabriel, for joining us this day.
My pleasure.
And see you guys next week for another Google Hangout on living income guaranteed. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.